All right, welcome back. We are Game 2004, that's Game Engines 2 in the winter 2026 semester at Georgia, and it's week 2, part 4 of our broadcast and recording. We're getting there. And the challenge when I left you guys in the last video was, hey, try and create all these materials. So let's do it together. I want you guys to think about how I would do this the best way. My first step would be to replicate the sphere as much as possible. So what I might do is, because I know I'm going to need 6 more spheres, is I might start off with just replicating those. Again, alt drag just to make the spheres kind of appear. Because remember, what we can do is we can drag the material out to the spheres in question, right? So this material we've already done, we want to make new ones here. One thing to do is I would duplicate, because we have a lot of the nodes already there. So if I duplicate the material, it'll make it, I can change the name. So we'll call this matte plastic, you know, as an example. So here's my material for matte plastic. And what values did you use for matte plastic, guys? Anybody? We know it's red, so we can drive the red value up. So I can put this as 1 for red, right? And we can use these as 0 if you want a really red color. Here we go. So there's your red. And it's almost kind of there, you know, for matte plastic. Remember, what we want is for matte plastic to drive the values down as much as possible. So if I was going to just try it like this, okay, and if I was going to take this matte plastic and just hit it on this one, it's kind of there, but it still needs a little bit more work. So what values did you guys use? It's not quite there. It's a little bit too bright, you know, from a thing. Because if you look at the original image, this looks like this. There's a little bit more shininess to it, and there isn't much shininess here at all. So how do I drive up the shininess of this thing? Yes?
I have the roughness at 0.5.
Nice. So let's do that. This is 0.5. I like it. And then?
I have the...
It's almost right there, right? Look at it. It's almost there. Yeah?
I have the specular at 0.1.
Okay, so once you've done that, now you're adding more glossiness to it, right? So there's more of a glossy kind of feel to it, but it's not bad. I think it needs to be a little bit more shiny. Like if you look at the thing that we have here, just a tiny bit more. So probably the specular value, if you left it at 0.5, what happens if I drive up the metallic value, right? So if I drove this up to 0.5. So it would kind of look like this. Take a look how shiny that is. It's not bad, right? And so if I put 0.5 for all of them, apply and save, and let's see what it actually looks like in process, right? So it's a little bit shiny, right? But if I look at what I see here, it's almost the same. Probably a little bit too much orange. There's too much there. I would probably drive the values down. 2 ways to drive the values down, because it looks one way here, another one with light, when light hits it. We could make it a darker red. So for example, right now it's quite bright red. I could drive the value down of the red color, right, to make it a little bit darker red. Could do that. And that's a little bit better, right? You can see that that's quite a little bit better than what it was. So it kind of looks like what we saw in the picture. All right, what about the next one? So if I was to, again, replicate this one, we're going to duplicate that one. There we go. And we'll call this M. We'll call this shiny plastic. Here's shiny plastic, and I'm going to apply it to the next one here. There's my shiny plastic. And this one's a little easier because we know that it's going to it's going to have some reflections, right? So what values did you guys use for shiny plastic? Let's go back to there. So I'm going to open that up. Oops. Shiny plastic. Anybody? Yeah.
Like 654. So
6 for specularity.
6 for metallic.
The color? Okay, so 6.
Oh, the color.
So what's your color value?
6, 1, and then the next one would be 0, 3.
So 0.61.
Yeah.
And then the next one is?
0.03.
Yeah. 0.3.
Yeah.
Okay, and?
And the next one would be 0.01.
So really just a bit of, okay, it's fine. And then what about the metallic, specular, and roughness? What did you use?
0.6.
Okay. So you use quite a bit of metalness. Yeah, and then?
0.25.
Yeah.
And 0.4.
So less rough, a little bit more specular. And if I apply and save, what do you guys think? Is that does that kind of look like this? I think it needs more. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think it may need a little more speculative.
Yeah. Okay. Let's add the specularity a little bit. So remember, what specularity does is it drives up the values, right? So if I was to make this purely specular, let's say I was going to go to a value of 1. Again, we want to leave this alone typically, but if I did that, what you're going to see is more glossiness, right? So that's maybe not what we want. What about if we drove this value up higher? Like if I went to like 0.8, 0.8, and I drove down the roughness even more. Like, so instead of the roughness being like 0.4, I went to like 0.2, as an example. Yeah.
I had them all at 0.1.
Okay. All right. That almost like a Christmas ornament, exactly, right? And if I was to apply and save this, if it looks like this here, then on the level, it's going to look like a lot of reflections. And that's too many reflections. You can see it's clearly driven up too high. Yes?
I did metallic 0, specular was 0.5, and then roughness was 0.2.
0, 0.5, and 0.2. Let's see how that looks. Again, we can go over here. This is not, so it's a little bit too orange with those. What were the color values you used?
0.40.
Okay, 0.4. Yeah.
0.
0 and 0.
003.
And 003.
Yeah. I just went red and then just darkened it a lot.
Okay. So it's kind of like, it's more of a burgundy red that you chose. Yeah. Is that, did you 0.4, 0.0, and 0.03?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So a little bit differently colored. Someone said 0.1, 0.1, and 0.1. Let's try those values. What did you use these values, right? So if I do 0.1, 0.1, and 0.1, let's use those values and see what that looks like. So when I drive down the roughness, what ends up happening is you get this real shininess to it, right? So if I apply and save, and let's drive up the red color even more. So let's make this so it's like 0.8. So a little bit more red than what it was before. It's not bad. It's kind of shiny plastic. It's almost like this. So I don't think it's bad what you chose. All right, let's do the next one. So let's choose. Just going to save that, and I'm going to copy, duplicate that one, and we'll call this M_leather. And I'm going to drag and drop this leather onto this. Right now it doesn't look right, but we're going to make it look right. There we go. And for leather, now we were talking about the color. So if I was going to look at the color for leather, and if it was like brown leather, it'd be kind of driven somewhere down in here, right? It can't be so specular. Like it needs to be more matte in some ways. So I think the roughness is definitely rougher up from a rough perspective, but it is also shiny to some degree. So again, I would probably put my minimum, my specularity to 0.5, and then start driving up the metalness. Right, so something like 0.6. Let's see what that looks like. And not enough. Maybe even drive down the roughness a little bit, 0.8, until I start getting some shine on it, right? And maybe make it darker. This is probably too light, so maybe even darker than that, right? As an example, even darker. Not quite black, but darker, right? And then let's apply that and see what that looks like. And we're getting to that look. It's not quite shiny enough yet, so what do I do to drive up the shininess? Yes?
For my values, I have metallic 0.8.
Okay, so really metallic, much more metallic, yep.
Specular 0.5 and roughness 0.6.
Okay, so you drove down the roughness a little bit more.
Yep.
That's not bad actually, because you see that, like, imagine if you were to use this with creases and that kind of stuff, then the leather would kind of pop from that perspective. So if I kind of did that, yeah, that's actually very good. Very, very clear, close to what we saw in the in there. The next one that we want to talk about is rubber. Now this is like a, like a bouncing ball rubber, it looks to me like. So again, I'm going to just get this one and duplicate it really quickly. Call this M_rubber. The color is what we really want to really capture here first. That's what I always work with first. What do I make the color? Right, so let's save all. There we go. And then we'll just kill this, and then we'll go into the rubber color. So we want to get that teal kind of color. What colors did you use, guys? Doesn't have to be the same people all the time. Yeah.
0.14,
Okay.
0.6, and 0.7.
Okay. It's not bad. I like it. It's very close to the color we had. So now that we've got the color, now the next time is the value. So the values, again, my feeling is more roughness, right? Because it's a rubber ball, right? So again, it kind of looks a lot matte, more matte, no shininess that I can see here. So again, way up, drive this value probably up to close to 1. Let's see how that looks. And then drive these values as low as possible. Let's say even 0.1, right? You do have a little bit of values in there. If I drove down the value of specularity even more, like let's say 0.2, then it'd be more and more less glossy is what you want, right? So then if I did something like that, and I saved, like I'm supposed to, then you can see that it's better, but it's a little bit too bright. So how do I drive down the brightness? I mean, I'm saying compared to this color, this is kind of a darker color, right? Did you have the same effect, or did you use different values for your roughness, specularity, and metalness?
I did 0.1 for specularity, and then 0.5 for roughness.
Okay.
And didn't have anything for metallic.
And 0 for metallic. Let's try that. And 0.5 for roughness.
Yeah.
Okay. I still think it's a little bit too bright relative to what we see here, right? So again, things you could do is change. I always start with a color, the base color. So if I was going to look at base color to make it darker, I could just drive down the values here, right? This is kind of like your value, your color value. That's what this is, right? And that's what it says if you hover over. Value from an art perspective means brighter or darker. If I want to have the same color, but I'm driving up the value, increasing the value, then I'm making it lighter. If I'm driving down the value, I'm making it darker, right? That's what I'm trying to do. So it's a term that they use all the time. So I definitely want to make it darker, even darker, right? Until I get that color that I'm close to. Again, I can also use the eyedropper tool if I'm not happy with the color. And once the color changes, gets closer, it still needs to be, in my opinion, a little bit less shiny, because now we have shininess that is there. So I would probably drive up this value even more, right, to kind of make it more matte, right? So something that looks like this would be okay, right? Probably even darker than this. I think it's still too bright, right? Like it's way too bright, and I think part of it is because of this specular value. Let's try that now, even higher. No. And let's drive that down to that. Let's try that out. Still too bright. I don't like it. But I'm saying you got to get closer to it, and that's the way you do it. You kind of look at the values, keep driving them up. So I think you get the picture, right? I mean, I can keep going with the wood, and we'll do the other one. Let's try this out. So duplicate these ones. Again, here they look good, but here in the scene is what you really want to test it out. So m_wood. We'll do that one. And we'll duplicate that one again. And we'll say m_chrome. Let's do chrome first. Chrome is kind of the easier one to do before we get into wood, right? So if I drove up chrome, and if I was going to, kind of create the chrome effect, what's the easiest way to draw it? Like this? The reason why I'm thinking this is the easiest one is because it's not difficult for us to think about what it would be. Yes.
Just
Color first. Let's talk base color.
white and then crank up the spectrum.
So white means 111, right? So all the values of all the channels are hot, right? That's number one.
Crank up metallic and specular and remove roughness for 0.
So 0, well, you can't do 0, but something like 0.02, let's say, for roughness, and then drive up these values, for metallic and specular. If you did that, like way up to the top, you got chrome. Like it's for, yeah.
I found a method where you don't even need to assign a base color. I just listed the metallic as 1 and then spectral as 1.
But you should always assign a base color. Always. The 4 things you always need to do when it comes to a surface is these 4 things. Don't leave the base color out. It'll mess you up in other places when you actually render stuff. So always have a base color channel. Okay? So chrome was pretty easy. That was an easy one to do. And I was going to do something similar to that. And the last one is wood. And I always find this one kind of challenging because the picture kind of shows this brown color. It looks almost like, it reminds me of, Minecraft wood, that kind of color. The wood inside like not the bark of the tree, but inside the tree, kind of thing. So it's kind of a light brown and fairly dark, not as matte as this one, but a little bit more, some, specular qualities, some glossiness to wood, because wood is slick. It has some of that, but again, it could be one of the harder ones to get proper. So again, I start with a base color. I want to choose a color like brown, and it's definitely some kind of lighter brown, so I can drive up the light brown. Not too much orange. I don't want to use too orange. And again, I can shift this around too if I wanted to. If I wanted to go more into the yellow, so kind of in there, probably where I would start. And then again, this is without me doing any kind of like sampling or anything like that. And then the next part is, drive up the roughness, right? And maybe a little bit of metallic, like maybe like 0.1 or 0.2, until you get something that's close to what you see in the image. That's a little bit too orange, again, it looks okay here, but it's what it looks like in the scene. And you can see how chrome is actually reflecting everything, which is pretty cool. All right, not bad. I think we did okay with what we did. And the exercise that I'm trying to do with you guys is not necessarily to be super accurate, but rather for you guys to understand the process. We need to have these 4 basic nodes every single time on this type of main node, okay? Part two to this is, let's continue with this and add some textures. Now, I want you guys to go to polyhaven.com, which is not a bad place. I find that this is one of the places you can go with free textures. You don't have to pay anything at all, which is pretty cool. And this is outside of Unreal Engine's ecosystem, so it's not using Fab or anything like that. But if you click on textures here, you can see that there's some ads that are weird. Who cares, right? We ignore those ads. But we can actually look through, and what I want is for you guys to find a red brick textures, the first one. So if I click on brick, and if I go to kind of like red brick, there's red brick, and you can see that this is the texture that I want. Okay, so this is an example of what the texture looks like. You can also look at 3D to give you kind of like a look at what the texture would look like in 3D, right? They give you layers. They can also give you different backgrounds. So kind of a really neat little app for free that you can look at. Okay, I kind of really like it for that reason. Okay, and again, I can go just back to this if I just want to see this. Or if I want to look at my reference, I can look at this, because this is what my brick texture might look like. All right, so positives and negatives about this site. Completely free to use. Limited, even though they got lots of textures, they're not quite as big as like Texture King or Textures.com or even Fab. Fab has tons and tons of textures that are out there, but it's really cool. Things to download. On the right, up here, when you download stuff, please try not to download 4K textures all the time. If something is going to kill your performance in your game for level up, it's your texture count and the quality of your textures. 2K texture, my friends, is probably where you want to go max, all right, for your stuff in level up, even lower. If you can go with a 1K texture and get away with it, like honestly, go with a 1K texture. Especially when you do mobile design. If you ever make a mobile game, 4K texture will kill your performance on mobile. Go with 1K, even lower, 512 megabyte, 512, half a K, as an example. And the reason why is because 1024 is pretty good, but you want to drive this down as low as possible. So I'm going to go to 2K texture instead of 4K. Notice that it's for Blender, right? But you can choose GLTF. Please choose GLTF, right? That's what I recommend. And then you can certainly download this, but there's also these other parts we're going to talk about. One part is we have different kinds of textures here. One is a displacement texture, so it actually raises I look at this as a bump map, which is different than a normal map, right? And there's also the diffuse part. This is the color that we're talking about, the roughness. And there's actually a combined ambient occlusion, roughness, and metallic called ARM, A-R-M, right? It's all those things combined. And what they do is they use different channels, the red, green, and blue channel for each one of those different textures instead of having individual textures, okay? For now, what we want to start with is downloading this GLTF. Okay, that one. I've already gone ahead and done that. And here's the red brick texture right here. I'm going to right click and I'm going to extract all. There it is. So in the GLTF, you get this GLTF file, and inside the textures, you can see that there's other textures as JPEGs in here. It's not everything that we need, and I'm going to get the other ones, right? So for now, what I want you to do is, with this open, I've got the ARM texture, and this is the diffuse texture, and there's the normal map. I want to grab the other ones we're missing. So I want to grab individual ones. So I want to grab ambient occlusion. I want to make it JPEG, all right? And I'm going to right click, and I'm going to save image as. I'm going to put it inside that same, kind of texture space. So I've got this red brick GLTF inside the textures folder. I'm just going to drop that in there. And I also want to grab individual, so the normal map we've got, but I also want roughness by itself. So I want to get the JPEG. Here's my roughness, and I'm going to save as, and I'm going to save it right there too. Wonderful. Okay, great. I've got my textures and everything else. Now I want to bring this into Unreal Engine. So how do I do that? And this is where people are confused sometimes on what to do. So here, let's make a brand new folder called Textures. And by the way, this is only one method. You can always go to Quixel Megascans and grab textures from there. There's lots of free stuff everywhere, right? This is just one of the ones you might want to use. So what I want to do is I want to go into my operating system. This is the easiest way to do this, and I can grab the GLTF. Let's start with the GLTF first. If I grab the GLTF and bring it in, it's going to give me a little dialog box that kind of pops up. It basically says this. It says, what do I want, right, as an example? Do I want all this stuff? And it kind of says the translation, and it talks about detecting any mesh types. And do I want to have static meshes? Do I only want textures? Do I want the materials too? Like, it'll give you everything, right? For me, I'm just going to leave it as default and click import and see what I get. So I actually get a material and a material instance. I actually get the material instance, right? And even a static mesh to test it out with, right? We're not going to use these, but these are nice little assets. And it gives me the red brick diffuse asset. That's what diff means. And also red brick normal, as well as red brick rough. Okay. And this is not rough. This is ARM, actually. It's roughness, ambient occlusion, and metalness. That's what that is. Okay. So let's see if we can get the other ones too. And I already saved those. So inside of my textures, I have my ambient occlusion. I'm just going to drag the texture in, right? And you can see that it drags in. I'm also going to drag in my roughness, drag that in, right? And one thing I think I missed is the ambient occlusion one. So let me just go back to that one, to Polyhaven for a second. I had it open here. And I want to go into that same one. So if I go to textures, and if I go to brick, and if I go to red brick, and if I go here, and I'll make sure it's 2K. If there was a metal one, then I would grab metal from here too. Notice that this one does not have a metal texture, right? So we could use the ARM texture for this. So ambient occlusion, rough, and metal. And the third channel in here would be used for that, okay? So now back to this, back to our textures. We have this. We want to create a material for all of this, right? So let's make a brand new material. And just to keep it simple, so it's in here, let's make the material, kind of like in the materials folder, make brand new material. And we'll call this M_red brick. There's red brick. I want to double click onto it to bring the red brick up. And I have these three things. I still need color, roughness, metalness, and all that stuff. Let's add that quickly in. So again, I'm going to press the 3 button, left click. So then the 1 button, left click a few times there. And I still want to drive the brick texture in there. So because I'm going to use textures, I'm curious for you guys, what should I do? What should I do with, I'm just going to metallic here, here's specular. We don't have those. I do have a roughness, so I don't need that, right? Question for you guys. I I have a base color node. Do I really need a base color like this? I mean, this is kind of like a tint that I would use if anything else. That's what this would be, right? So, I mean, I can just use a texture itself. And one way to get the textures, if you go to the content drawer, and if you go to your textures, you can drag in a texture from the content drawer right in there. So for example, this red brick diffuse texture, I can drag it in. But before I do that, I really don't like the naming that I have. Let me go back to that. I'd like to rename these, and the textures, I mean. And what do you think the name should be for some of these textures? Anybody? So one thing I would do is start with this ambient occlusion one. So I would say something like this. I would rename, and I would rename, so I like the red brick. It'd be like, so T for texture underscore, so it's red brick, right? And it's ambient occlusion, AO is what I would put in there. So I know that that is the ambient occlusion texture for red brick, okay? Even though it says that. Same thing with this one. So this is base color. So this could be diffuse or the D texture. Sometimes we use D for that. So again, it would be texture underscore, right? Red brick, right? And then underscore D for diffuse. It's usually used for the color. Here, same thing. T underscore red brick, N for normal map, right? And this is ARM. This is an ARM texture. So T underscore red brick, and then ARM at the end. So I know it's a combined texture. That's what that is. This one is T underscore, and this is the roughness. T underscore red brick. R for roughness, right? And now I've categorized them all, right? So I know what all of these are. It's very clear. These ones here, this static mesh, if you really want to keep it as an example, you can put it in. So you can kind of put in that static mesh should be SM, static mesh, and then red brick. And then because it's a material instance, if you want to ever see that again, I'm not going to use it, but I can say MI red brick. Okay, so that's kind of all of them in here. Okay, great. So now that I have that, let's add a sphere for us to use. So I'm just going to grab the original one that we used before over here, the test sphere, and I'm just going to use Alt Drag to pull it in. So that's the one we're going to use to test the new texture and the materials. So here's my material, and here's red brick. I'm just going to pull that on. So right now it's nothing. We're going to fix that, and let's save all, because we just did some importing and all this kind of stuff. And let's go back to the red brick. So I want to pull in some of these textures. And the way to do that is to drag and drop the texture in. And when you do that, you get a texture sample node, right? That's the first thing. So if I drag in from the RGB output into the base color input, now we're going to see the texture come up, okay? Next, I don't have metallic and specular, so I leave these values there. Specular should clearly be 0.5 because that's our default for specularity, right? We do have a roughness texture, so let's bring that in. So let's take roughness, the R, and bring that in. Here's roughness. Okay. And then that decides our roughness for this one. The last thing we're missing is the normal map. And I'm going to bring that in. So let's talk about some of these things. Oops. Clicked on the wrong one. Let's bring in the normal map and put that in there. There we go. One thing we're missing is the ambient occlusion, right? And we do have that one as well, so we can bring that texture in. So let's just do the ambient occlusion, which is the AO. And if I really want the metalness, instead of having this metallic node, I can use the ARM texture for that as well. So I can I'll show you how to do that in a second. So here's ambient occlusion. And then for instead of using this constant node, I can change that to the ARM node. So if I get the ARM node in there, now the ARM node has, look at this, RGB, but actually what these are is just different grayscale channels. So this is like the ambient occlusion, the roughness, if you wanted to use that, and then the metalness here. So if I take this, the green one, and go to metallic, that'll be the metallic version of that one. And that's all of them except for specular. And that's okay because this particular material, I mean, it's a brick, right? So we don't have much specularity there as well. So that's kind of what you should have, something like this. And that, my friends, is the way you bring textures in by default. Apply and save. And if I go back to my level, you can see that the red brick is quite bright. But again, I have it in the light. That's why I put it here. I have it in the light. If I look at it from the other side, it looks pretty good, right? It's good to look at it from both sides. You can see we did a pretty good job for the other ones that we did, right? If I look at it from this perspective. But in the light, it kind of really glows a lot. And that's pretty good. So what are these things that we just added in? I want to go through them from basic texture perspective. So again, base texture is usually the diffuse color that we want to go in the diffuse color channel, right? The normal map is an illusion. That's what it is. You guys have learned about normal maps before, I'm hoping. So just to be clear, normal map, all it is like, it gives you the sense of how it's going to look. It simulates how light would look if there was bumpiness to it. It's not truly a bump map. So a good thing to do is if we're going to model an organic model, like say a person, we might start off with millions of voxels, right? In a voxel painting program like ZBrush or 3D Coat as an example, right? And then with these millions of voxels, what I might do next is I would retopologize. I would go from millions of voxels down to, let's say, thousands of quads, right? And I want to try and use quads for an organic model as much as possible, right? But the great thing about the voxels are we can get a very high quality, a normal map from this high quality image that we've got. All that's what we can do. And so what we can do is we can take that high quality image and put it on a very low poly model, so it looks like it's got lots of details, but actually has none, right? So this is a performance-saving feature of the normal map, right? Because it adds features that don't exist. For example, our object is a sphere, right? And yet, if you look at it from a different perspective, it might look like it has some density to it. It doesn't. You can see that it's perfectly a sphere on this side, right? But again, driving up the color values or driving down the color values, you make it look like it's very realistic. It's pretty cool, right? Normal map. All right. The ambient occlusion, I want you to think about it as fake shadows. That's what ambient occlusion does. It actually adds depth to things. Anything that's dark becomes darker. Everything that's light stays light. So we only care about the dark areas of the ambient occlusion map, right? And that's what gives you things like, kind of the defects in the wall and that kind of stuff. It really brings those darkest parts out, right? And you can see the differences. So what I've got here is a progression of when you use all those features all at once, okay? So that's really what it looks like in terms of, now they've done it a little bit different. When I was looking at it from before, what you could do is instead of using ambient occlusion directly into the ambient occlusion channel, you can actually use a multiply node with your color. Now it's not going to do anything different. It won't look any different at all. But I want to show you what this is because I did it differently here in the PowerPoint than what I did here in my red brick. So instead of using the ambient occlusion channel directly into here, I'm just going to use Alt left click to disconnect it. What they did, right here, is they did one of these. They kind of put the ambient occlusion map up here, and then what they use is a multiply node. The multiply node, if you press M and then left click, you get the multiply node. Try that, M and then left click, right? Multiply multiplies two floats. So I take the output from this one and the output from my texture sample, right? And then I disconnect these. So I don't disconnect these altogether, the sample itself, right? And then once I have those two things, then the output from these two go into the base color, and now you get, it drives up the ambient occlusion a little bit more, okay? At the end, if I click apply, you may not notice much of a difference here. See, kind of looks the same. Although I do think that the features are a little bit more pronounced, right? I don't know if you noticed that. So this is good, but it'd be terrible if we just had one material and we just have that one material every single time. And now we're going to talk about the next piece, which is material instances. Let's talk about that next. I have a material, but I want variations in the material. I want a more of a red brick. I want a blue brick. I want a yellow brick. I want other kinds of bricks. I want bricks that are shiny. I want bricks that are dull. I want whatever, right? So you can do that with material instances. So I'm going to right click here and I want to say, well, you can create a material instance when you right click on the material itself. The way you code this is MI for material instance and then red brick. The same name as the material, but just with an MI in front of it, material instance. So if I double click on material instance, you get a different editor. Okay, you don't have the same control that you normally would have in a material, right? Instead, you have the stuff on the details panel here, which show you properties that have been exposed from the material itself. Okay? Right now, we have 0 properties exposed, so the material instance is practically useless. It's like the same thing as the material. We could change a few things. It comes with light masks, like cast shadows. It does come with other things here. I can change the opacity mask and a bunch of other things here. This is basic for all material instances. And there's also some advanced use as well. But how do I make it so that I can see some of this stuff, in the material instance? Well, what I want to do is let's start with the textures. So if I right click on any one of these nodes, I can click on convert to parameter. Let's do that. Convert to parameter. This is in the material itself. If I do that, I can call this base color. Here's base color, right? I'm going to use the American spelling, American. On the left, please don't leave this yet. See where it says material expression here on the left-hand side? You can choose, instead of material expression being none, you can add something like texture. Make your own. Almost like how we group stuff in our nodes in blueprints, right? Same thing. I'm creating a category, the texture category, all right? If I apply and save for this one, apply and save, and I go back out to my material instance, you can see now that I have a texture group with the texture that I'm using, red brick AO, right? By the way, it says base color, but I chose the wrong one. Let's rename it properly. If I made a mistake like I did. So I can just kind of go in here on the left where it says base color and we'll say ambient occlusion, which is what I chose. I did the wrong one, but that's okay. I'll do the other ones too. Let's do all of them. So convert to parameter, and we'll call this base color. And we'll do this one. This is the arm parameter, but all we care about is, because it has 3 different values, right? All we really care about is the metalness, right? So we're going to call this, I'll call it what it's supposed to be. So we'll say that this is the arm, right? That's what it is. And right click on this one, and that's going to be the roughness. And one thing I got to do is go back in a second and change the category. And we'll call this normal map. Okay, so let's do the categories now. So this one is going to be texture. That one is going to be texture. This one is going to be texture. And base color, also going to be texture. Apply and save. And when I go back to the material instance, you can see that they're all exposed. So why is this good? Because that means I can swap out textures here in the material instance and have a different texture for some of these things than what I have in here. Okay, so if I want another ambient occlusion texture, maybe I've gone into Photoshop, and I photoshopped the ambient occlusion texture and added a lot more dark areas, or added some other details. I can do that and then drag in that texture instead of this one, as an example. So that's what this is. But what about if I want to drive up values? I want to increase the metalness. I want to decrease the, I want to increase the normal map value and all that kind of stuff. Well, you can do that too. So if I go back to the material itself, so there is something that I can do with my normal map to get that. So if I look for normal, and there's a node that's called flatten normal. Let's try that one, flatten normal. And notice that it takes a normal map. So instead of me going directly into the normal map here, take a look. I uncheck this, and I go from the normal map into the flatten normal node. And then I need some kind of constant, right? And I can drive in that constant in there, the flatten normal. And then from the flatten normal, that's where it's going to go into the normal map now. So this new constant, let's make that into a parameter. So I'm going to right click, and I'm going to make this a new parameter, so convert to parameter, and we'll call this flatten normal, right? And let's, if I do that, if I press compile and save, or apply and save, there we go, and I go back to material instance, right now it's in the global scalar parameter values. Let's put it in somewhere other than that, because this is the normal. We'll just call this parameter. So again, I'm clicking on this, and then this is the parameter name, but the group is going to be parameter. Okay, apply and save. So now it looks like parameter, and if I check this on, right, and if I increase this value from 0 to 1, you can see it changes some of the stuff, and I can also drive up this value even more to kind of drive how much of the normal map I want to show, which is pretty cool. And that's what we want to do with material instances. We want to modify the material instance that modifies the material. And if you think of what a material instance is, it's inheritance, my friends. It inherits everything from the material, and then we're allowed to change some of those options. Okay? And you know, you can find a nice value for your normal map. I like 0.15. That's pretty good as a value that I like to use for my material. How about if I wanted to change the tint? I want to change the tint of my ambient occlusion and my base color. How do I do that? Well, let's drag this over here. And for my base color, what I want to do is I want to add in another node. So I want to add in a constant, right? And this will be like, how do I call this color power, if you will? That's what this is going to be. So how much of this color I'm going to drive. So let's right click and we'll call this color power. There we go, color power. Right, and then what I want to do is instead of directly going into this multiply node, let's uncheck this, and I want to multiply it by this. So I'm going to use another multiply node, multiply, here it is, and then drive the color power in there. I can make this so it's the color is 1 right now, and then I'm going to drive that into this one, and then if I press apply and save, and the color power should also be a parameter. There we go. Then if I go back to this part, you can see I can drive the color up. Like for example, I can make it brighter or I can dull it down, right? And this is kind of really great if I want to make a dirty wall or I want to make a kind of a washed out wall or something like that, right? You can even make it almost glow, like a white wall, right? Again, you know, you don't have to use all the parameters, but you know, they can uncheck it or check it whenever you want to. So that's base color. And I can do the same for all of them. So take a second. I want you to create modifiers for all of them. One thing I'll let you know is the ambient occlusion uses an add node instead of a multiply node. All right, so there's an add node. So here's something we can do. We can go like this. We can go for the ambient occlusion. Instead of it being just multiplying by this, and if I want a modifier, let's call this a AO power, right? So again, I would use a constant. I would expose it. I'll call this ambient occlusion power. So how much do I want it to be effective? But instead of multiplying it, I want to use an add node. So if I press A and left click, then I get add. And I'm going to add these together in here. And then right now the value is 0. That's okay. And I can just kind of put it into the multiply node there. And again, you have the same thing. If I go back to the red brick afterwards, well, let's make sure it's added properly. So back to this one. I want to make sure that that is under parameter. Apply and save. Always have to apply and save. Then on here, if I go to ambient occlusion power and I increase this, you can see that it can get darker, like much darker. The darker areas can get darker and lighter. And I can do the same thing with my flat normal. You can really have a change of effect of the way these things look a lot more than what you're seeing right now. I think you get the picture. That's metalness. The roughness, again, I can go rough power with that. Let's do that one. So again, we'll make a parameter, call this rough power, right? And Then what I can do is for rough power, make sure it's part of the parameter list and uncheck this one, multiply it. Whenever we multiply, what's really happening is we're changing the darkness of an object more than anything else. If you think about multiply does, it's not what you think, right? So definitely leave this at 1 to start off with. You don't want to change the roughness. If you make it lower than 1, then it'll make it rougher, right? So apply and save. And if I go back to red brick material, you can see if I change the rough power and I increase it or decrease it, take a look what happens to it. It becomes almost like a little bit more fleshy. It almost looks like a rubber ball, right? With the rough power, which is pretty cool, right? Like almost like a soccer ball, right? So it's kind of cool what you can do with all those objects. Last but not least, tiling. Tiling. What about if I want to tile a texture? I want to tile the UV map, right? So how do I do that? Because tiling is an issue. Then we'll take another short break if we can, 5 minutes, and we'll come back and we'll finish the last part, which is your homework for you for today, okay? So what I want to do is I want to add in some values. So let's add in a couple of these, okay? A few of them. All right. So what I want to do with this one, I want this one convert to parameter. Let's call this UV. So this is the UV map, right? And this is like tiling, right, on the U. So tiling U. Let's just rename that to tile U. Tile U. And let's make the group a different group. We'll call it UV, the UV group. This one I'll choose, convert this parameter to tile V. So what is U and what is V? Anyone know? Why U and V? Because we're wrapping a texture around an object, they don't want to use X and Y. That's the answer. So U and V is just X and Y, but it's used on a texture that wraps an object as opposed to, you know, some other coordinates. But it's another set of coordinates so we don't get confused. That's what UV means. U and V is just X and Y, okay? Just from a texture perspective. All right, we want to definitely use these as 1s. We don't want these to be 0s because otherwise it won't tile. So let's just do 1. And I want to change these parameters to pan. So we'll call pan U and pan V. This is like an offset. So convert to parameter. Here we are. And I want to multiply these. So I want to use the multiply node. So again, M, left click. Okay. There we go. There's multiply. And I also definitely want to have 1s in there for all this. 1, 1, 1, 1. Okay. And I want to combine all this, right, where I add them together. So I want to have this is an add. So an 8. They get added together. And this, my friends, is your UV modifier. So what you want to do is notice that there's UVs at the back of these ones. Take a look, right? Let's make sure these are all in the right places. The group should be UV for these, the pan as well. There we go. So what we can do is we can take this and drive it into all the UVs. From here, we just drag lines in to all the UVs. And you want to do it for all of them, because otherwise, if you tile it and you move one but not the other, that'd be really weird, you know, for you to do. Okay? You don't want to drive the base color but not the ambient occlusion, or vice versa, right? Okay, there we go. Apply and save. And notice it says 111, and we have a bit of an issue. So this tells us that we have an incorrect operation, right? So if I was to go back to red brick, it's like grayed out, right? And let me just go back and make sure that this is correct. Tile V, pan U. These are all correct. Yeah. Apply and save. I can tell you right away it's wrong, because if it wasn't, then, and if I turn these on, right, as an example, nothing happens. So we have like this, which is kind of messed these things up. So what could be wrong? Either the multiply nodes or the add node is wrong, okay? So that's something to note. But this is kind of what we want to do. We want to be able to drive, you know, kind of like the UVs, right? Let's try it the other way around. Let's try, instead of multiply nodes first, I think it's the other way around. I think these might be add nodes. Let's try them. I think my bad for these ones. We can just actually drive it from here. If I just did add, you can see that from here, and it kind of changed the colors, which is not what we want, right? We don't want it to change the colors here. And I think it's add first, then multiply. So I think it's one of these. Add first, and then mult. And if it's not, we'll leave it out. Yeah, no, because otherwise this color should be the same, right? All this does, all these numbers do is change the tiling of this, and it's not doing what I want. So it's not the answer. And I'm sure if we look it up, we can figure it out. But this is kind of what you do. You modify the UVs. It's not part of the PowerPoint anyway. And one thing is all these little things here that you have. I think it's kind of a combination of this stuff. But basically what it is the tiling changes the UVs itself, the input. Notice the input is like 0, as an example. Well, that right there is, you know, the UV map that you have for how it's tiled. So if I change the numbers from 1 to 2, then what it's supposed to do is make the tile bigger, right? Or 0.5 makes the tile smaller, right? And this is kind of what we want. We'll come back to this. I'll give you an update on this next week, but it's one of these, I just can't remember. It's been so long. I didn't put it on the PowerPoint. So now we know what materials do for the most part, other than my little kerfuffle there. And that's where I wanted to start with today, because without materials, you can't create landscapes and blend them. You don't know what those are. Every material counts, and you can do things like increase the tiling and stuff like that as well, okay? A good example of this is any materials you download from Quixel Bridge. So if I go back to Fab, do you guys have Quixel Bridge access? I always ask this question. I don't know if you do. So if I type in Quixel Bridge, or Quixel Megascans actually, do you guys have access to this? Quixel Megascans. Now you have to log in, so make sure you're logged in here on the right. If you're not logged in, then it won't tell you it's there. It's free. It should be free for you guys to use. Is it free? Good. So one thing is you can search for stuff like that in here as well. If you go to materials and textures, then you can look at some materials in here that are free. So for example, you can see like there's a desert outback or whatever, or there's a curated stone. And you can also filter. So if I said Quixel Megascans brick, you know, as an example, then you can look for a red brick wall from Quixel Megascans. Let's grab this one too. So the way you would grab this, if you click on it, right? This is the red brick wall from Quixel Megascans. If I click on Add to Project, then what it's going to do is it's going to add it in to its own little folder. So it adds in a Fab folder, a Megascans folder, and then it gives me this, a material instance. So then, if I wanted to inspect somebody else's work, if I double click, then I can look at what they've got here. So what they've done is they got global, here's tiling, and here's your offset, right? And they give you the parent material. Take a look, here's the parent material right here. So if I double click on the parent material, we can kind of inspect what they did. So here's base color, metallic, and specular. And if I kind of hover over, they have a reroute node. This little thing here is a reroute node, right? Where they use color adjustments here. This is why it's good to understand how it's done. There's UVs, there's the UVs. So we can actually look what UVs do, and I probably messed up, like I said. Here it is. So he uses a QMF tiling for UVs, and that's why they did. So we can kind of use the same node, a QMF tiling node, and that would create the UVs that we need. Now notice that we have this UVs thing. So without us making all these connections, what we can do with our own texture, if I go back to my red brick here, so let's take these away. This is clearly wrong. And just like we did here, we have this QMF tiling. Now what they did was they used these as offsets, and the tiling is one number. So instead of a UV, they use U and V combined. So you know why they did that? Because they're like, wait, am I going to make the X value skewed relative to the Y value? Why would you do that? You want to keep everything the same, so that way the UV would all match together. Yes?
I think the material, it says it costs like $1.30.
What? Have you logged in?
Yeah, the brick one you put it is like $1.50.
I will post it. I will post it. Okay, later on. Don't spend money, okay? Don't spend money, my friends. I will get it for you. Thank you for that. So, but QMF tiling is what I want. So if I go back to my red brick material and I put in QMF, and you can see QMF tiling is a thing. Here is QMF tiling. I don't need both UV. Let's just get rid of the V, and we'll just call this tiling. So we'll rename the node to tiling. And we'll rename these, instead of pan, to offset, because that's what they are. So offset U and offset, like I said, offset V. There's U and V. And we can plug in those values now here into the QMF tiling node nicely. And once I've done that, this result is UV. But what I can do is I can do a reroute. And you can notice that there is something called a named reroute declaration node. Take a look, guys, please. This is going to help you. An add reroute declaration node. This one, a named reroute declaration node. And if I do that and call this UVs, right, now that I've named this, I don't have to connect all those crazy wires in here because it's ugly, right? I can make a comment here, which is this is UV tiling and offset, just like we would in any other blueprint. And then from this, I can actually go right-click and go named reroutes. Take a look at that. Here's UVs. And then I can just plug in the UVs in there as opposed to doing those reroutes. And we'll do more of this as well as material functions next week. Here we are. Oops. But you need to do them to all of them because you need to modify all of these. All right, now once we've done that, apply and save. And if I go to my red brick material, suddenly in my UV I have an offset and a tiling number. And what if I change this to like 2? Watch what happens. It becomes smaller, right? Or if I go 0.5, it becomes way bigger, right? And so what this allows us to do is change how the tiling looks. And if it's too big, like for some of your models for your temples, the tiling was off. You need to increase the tiling. So you can do that by changing this to like a number. Like for example, 4 would make this a much bigger, a much more dense tiling, right? And to make it more interesting, you could offset the tiling by a number, like let's say for example 2. And what this does is it changes the offset. It moves things around a little bit for the offset, right? So if you offset X and Y to something else, like let's say 0.5, then you can see that it offsets where it's polling from the sample, right? So that your model looks different. Okay, that's what those do. And that's what tiling does. So if I did this and I pressed save, right? And if I, instead of on my level, instead of using my material directly, what I'd want to do instead is use my material instance. So if I go back to materials, and if I dragged and dropped my material instance on top of this, then we're going to have a much different looking thing than what we had before. Okay, let's file, save all, and that should be there. I will produce any kind of textures or other things that you can't get. I will get them, and I'll put them up on Blackboard. Okay. All it's going to mean is I'm just going to unzip it, and then what you do is when you rezip it, you have to put it back in the same folder that I have it in. So you'd have to be under content materials or content whatever, and that's where it's going to be. So I won't do it today because it takes time, but we're going to move on. There's questions around materials. Does this give you more of an idea about how they work? That's what I want you to learn here. All right. This isn't about I'm not doing this to make you crazy. I'm doing this because I want you to understand, because your games will pop if you use the right materials in UV map. Okay? Let's move to the next part of what we're doing today. And before we finish, there is a bit for you to do, right? And I've just skipped all the way down to landscape. So I want to use my landscape tools, but I don't want to use this level. Let's make a new level. So File, New Level, please. We'll call this, we'll use the empty level again. Let's try this again. And I want to call this level 2. So I'm going to File, Save All, Save Level As. I'm going to call this level 2. Here it is. We need to add some lighting. Does anyone remember how to do that? Does anyone remember how to do the lighting? So, what was that? Well, so again, if I go to Windows, right, there is the environment lighting mixer, environment light mixer. If I click onto that, then you can really quickly create a skylight, a directional light, an atmosphere, volumetric clouds, height fog, and scroll down and click on volumetric fog. And once you've done that, you've got your lights. Very simple. And once we've done that, we've got a very basic lighting system. Let's put this all inside of a folder. So we're going to right click and move to new folder that we're going to call Light and Sky, like I've done before. Okay. I want to create a new landscape this time. And the way I'm going to do that, I'm going to switch from selection mode to landscape mode. Here I am. And you're going to see something that looks like this. Now, remember I talked about your assignment. Take a look at this craziness that it's giving you here. All right? The overall resolution is 505 by 505. Okay? And the number of components, right, is something that's there as well. The number of components in the X and Y direction, as well as the section size, 63 by 63 quads. So what does all this mean? Well, I detail it right here. So section size. This is the first value that defines the landscape size and resolution. Section size defines the number of quads in a component is composed of. All right? So if I look at these, if I kind of zoom out of here, you can see that this is actually divided into a bunch of quads. Take a look, right? So what this is doing is an 8 by 8 region. Look, there's the number of components, 8 by 8. So it's 64 components inside of the entire map itself, right? Every component, that's the number of components. Sections per component is 1 by 1, so one section. You can also go 2 by 2. If you do that, it's more complex. Please don't. Section size. How many quads are in each section? You can reduce the size of this, and if you reduce the size, it becomes less complex. Let's keep it at 63 by 63 for now. Okay? But what we essentially have here is 505 by 505 meters. 505 by 505 meters. How many square kilometers is that? So think about this. 500 by 500. 50 by 50, 2,500, 2.5 kilometers square. That's what this is, right? Is it 2,500? I think it is, 2,500 kilometers. Or something like 25 kilometers. 25 kilometers. That's what it is, 25 kilometers square. So it's huge. That's the answer. It's massive. You don't have to make it this big, all right? But I want to talk about this. Let's click Create, please. So this is definitely one way of doing it. And what I want to talk about is sculpting. So by default, like I said, there's a few options. And if you look at the PowerPoint, it talks about a few things to modify. One is the brush size. So if I kind of zoom in, let's just zoom in here. And it's hard to see because we're so far out. Let's increase the speed of my camera to like 8 or 9. Okay, so we can zoom in and out of features. So I'm going to go to the corner here so you can see it. So here's my thing. So if I left click, I can increase the size of my, kind of my geometry here. And what I'm really doing is I'm creating a height map. That's what I'm doing when I'm doing this thing. And behind the scenes, I'm creating this height map. And this doesn't look that great. So what can you do to reduce this? Well, I can use modifiers. Each one of these brush types present different options. So for example, if I do one of these with this brush type, it gives me more of this like, you know, mountain. It looks like a weird brush to use, believe it or not. But if you use it properly, you can actually get a really cool mountainous effect. Again, I think the power here is too much, and we can reduce the tool strength even more than this to give us more of a subtle kind of effect for mountains. Okay, so this is the idea that we have here. The other one is this one, the pattern brush, which is even more of that. So you can see that this is a little bit more pattern. Now, why would you want to use this thing as opposed to the other one? Well, this creates actually interesting patterns where we have angles that we can use. Remember, what we can do with this is create this into hills. And the way to do that is change from your sculpt to your smooth brush. So if you smooth some of this stuff off, suddenly from that ugly pattern, smooth is a destructive algorithm, and the destructive algorithm removes some of these sharp corners and creates more of a hills area. Okay? So again, the patterns are useful. It's not just, wow, that's a useless thing to do. No, it's really good. The other one is flatten. Okay, so flatten's kind of cool. If I flatten an area, then what I can do is I can create a plateau, like an area that's completely flat. So if I want to put a house or something like that, or a basin, I can do that. Shift and you know, some of these controls, for example, I can do that. Also, if I scroll down, it says the brush size, the fall off, that's important to note, and the type of flattening I want. So for example, I can do a raise or lower. So if I want to raise a platform, I can do that. I can also do a terrace. So you can try some of this stuff out for flattening, right? And you can increase the strength of what that might look like when you flatten the top, as an example, okay? So keep trying some of these effects. There's kind of combined effects or some of this stuff. You can really flatten it out if you want to make an area that's flatter. Especially if you're going to put objects you're going to download from Quixel Megascans, sometimes you want to make it flat, and then from there you can do other things. If you don't like it, you can always smooth it out. So I can kind of smooth that area out again, but it's kind of made a raised area, which is not a bad way of doing things. Ramps are neat too. Ramps, what they do is they can create, if I press the ramp and press enter, you know, as an example, so what it'll do, it will create an area in my ramp like this, right, where there's two objects in the ramp, the bottom part of the ramp, this part, and the top part of the ramp, this part. All right, so I can kind of move those around. So what this allows me to do is make very sharp, you know, kind of corners like that. If I press enter, you can see that I can kind of make a hole, right? So I've kind of dug in there, right? Or if I bring the ramp, now notice this is in the ground, that's why it's dark. If I bring the ramp up, right? And if I drive it this way, then I can make another ramp that goes like this. And you're going to say, why ramps? Because now you can make mountains again. If I go back to smoothing, I can smooth some of this stuff off, and I can make these features that look more of a peak with the type of ramp I use. And I can use ramp between ramp as an example. Here's ramp. Here's my ramp. I can ramp up areas, right? Here's my ramp, and I can move them around. Here we go. And if I slightly move them around, the ramp, so I'll kind of do one of these, press enter. You can see that I can create peaks, you know, if I want to, like even higher than that. And then I can go ahead and smooth afterwards. So it's a kind of a multi-operation that I'm doing. But that's how you kind of do it. You kind of create areas that look like they're incorrect in the beginning, and they are. But then, once I've got this, there's nothing to stop me to go back from sculpting it and make it increase the size of these things, you know, as an example. So I'm just going to increase the size of these things now, right? And then do another operation like smooth, where I can kind of smooth it down. Now, smoothing is, like I said, I'm just going to do that, a very destructive operation. So you want to really turn the tool strength down whenever you do this kind of smoothing stuff, because otherwise it destroys everything that you did, right? So that's kind of what you can do. You can kind of change the landscape slowly, slowly. Other really cool things are erosion effects, where you can add things like erosion, hydro, and noise are all things that can have a different kind of smoothing effect that's added in to your mountains and stuff like that. So this is kind of erosion. It's kind of another way of smoothing. hydro, that what that does is you can actually increase the rain amount, so it kind of sculpts areas more with almost like what rain would have done if it kept falling on those areas over and over again. That's what hydro does, all right? And the last one is noise, and what noise does, believe it or not, is it adds bumpiness to the area. Now you can increase that strength a little bit, and the more you increase it, it could add, it kind of takes whatever's in there already and increases it, adds noise to a particular area, makes it more rough. And this, my friends, is how you create your landscape. Slowly, slowly you go through, you can push it up and pull it down, change your brushes, because there's brushes and all that kind of stuff, and could take you a long time to do all this. But, my friends, there's another way to do it, and it's using height map, which is what I recommend. Let's do that instead. If I go back to manage, right, and if I go to new, right, you can see it's going to add this one on top of the other one. Let's get rid of this landscape. So let's go back to selection, please, and let's get rid of this landscape. So delete it, right? And I'm going to go back to landscape, right? And then instead of manage, instead of sculpting, I'm going to go to import from file this time, okay? Import from file. Now I've given you a height map on Blackboard if you want to use that one. And I've also given you a really great site for height maps, which I also recommend. So let's go to see that one as well. So way at the bottom here, it talks about sculpting tools and what they do, right? But what I want to show you is this height map. And there's a couple of tools actually that are used, third-party tools that are used for height maps that are really great. Gaia and World Machine. Those are paid-for tools that you can use, very popular tools that people use to create height maps. Or instead of using these, you can use a free height map that are pre-generated from this place here, Motion Forge Pictures height maps. And you can see there's a few of them here. So you can choose one of these if you want to. And what this is it's a great starting place. Instead of you making everything what we just did and slowly go through it and make it, it gives you something to start with, which is way better than just sculpting. And then you can sculpt on top of it. You can add more sculpting stuff on top of it. You don't have to stop there. I've also given you one on Blackboard. So if we go back to Blackboard for a second, I'm just going to go there. And let's go to Blackboard. I'll show you where that is. So inside of your week 2, if you want to try this one, I like this one too. It's very subtle of a height map. It's this one. All right. And so you can download this file. If you kind of click onto it and download the original file, you can do that on Blackboard. And I have it downloaded already. So that's here. So what I can do is, if I go back to Unreal Engine, I can kind of target that height map. Here it is, and press open. Now, what you're going to see is this madness, right? And it's not going to work until you click import, all right? But instead of doing that before that, it's really big. Take a look at this. If I actually zoom out here for a second, it's massive. It's like crazy cracked, right, to use this height map, right? So instead of using this height map like the way it is, change this value here to a smaller value, like let's say something like 1.5, and or something smaller like that, like 10, you know, whatever. So it gives you like a value, you know, that is bumpy, but it's not crazy. So this value here is the Z scale that you can monkey with. I'm going to click this import button. Now when I do that, it's going to import the landscape that looks like this. All right? Way better, way faster at doing landscapes this way than doing it the other way around, and it's pretty big actually, right? One way to try this out is, just like we do with any level, let's put in, just on this landscape alone, right here in this little valley here, let's put in our character. So I'm going to go from landscape mode to selection mode, and I want to add in a character, right? So that's the basic stuff that we want to add in, which is a player start. Here it is. And I don't want to put it way up here. Let's put it lower. Not inside the mountain, like in here. There's our player start, right? And let's see what happens when we play. Right, there he is. So she is. So she falls. And you can see that it's massive, this place that we just got this height map. Look at it. It's pretty massive, right? And it might look small, but actually it's pretty darn large, right? So try some of these out. Oh yeah, she's struggling with some of this stuff. Try some of these out, and you can see that, you might like some of these more than others, but you can see that there's a bit of verticality here than the stuff we've done. Now, here's what you do. You take this height map, and then you use your sculpting tools to adjust it, to add more areas, to flatten it in some places, or do whatever. So you have a starting point, and you can make something that looks fantastic, my friends, like way better. This is just one of them. Next week, when we get together, we'll talk about how to create blended materials for each of the areas of your height map. Okay, homework for you guys, right? Get a height map, take a look at it, and take that temple that I gave you, or the one that you made, and put it somewhere, right? On the height map, right? But I want you to play around with some of the tools. Try some of those effects. Try rain. Try the, increasing it or decreasing it. Make the mountains bigger. And here's something else I want you to try. In Megascans, if you can do it, right? Megascans has a couple things, not just surfaces. I've added in a couple of surfaces in here. But what I'm going to also do in my version is if I go to Fab, and if I search for, instead of just brick, and it's just materials that are being here, I'm going to go to All Products, right? And you can search for things like, like a mesa or one of those kind of things. You can kind of scroll down with Megascans, and there's some great assets that we're going to be using next week that I'm going to share with you. So before we get into doing it next week, you're going to see that there's some stone or whatever. Like for example, if I do something like cliff, if I type in cliff in here, here's some cliff. There's a desert western cliff, right? Or if I do Nordic, let's do Nordic. Here's Nordic. So there's some Nordic cliffs. And I really like this massive Nordic cliff. So if I was to add this into my scene by dragging and dropping, what it's going to do is going to add this in right here, right? And now you might say, like, why? Why would you do that? Well, because you can scale this up. So if I was to do scaling, let's really scale this up high, okay? Something like this. And what you can do is you can put this in with some of these hills and mountains so you can create a different type of effect, right? Especially when, if I do an alt drag here, I can add them in and also rotate it so that they look like it's different cliffs, my friends. So you can use your height map as a guide, but then you can fill up this area with things that look like different cliffs, right? And if I was to start my game again, you can see the effect immediately, what it looks like. It looks way nicer than if it's just my map. So this is another way of blocking things out. You block it out with your height map, and then from there, what you're doing is, you're gonna, take a look here. I can't get closer. Why can't I get closer? Because when I brought these things in, right? So if I was to look at the cliff, and again, don't just bring it in. You'd have to rename this. But if I drag it into what the cliff looks like in the content browser, what you're going to see is this. Okay. One more. I got a couple things to tell you before we go. Notice that the cliff is here, and if I was to go to show and I go simple collision, it looks like this. That's not good. Unless it's far away. If it's far away and your character is never going to get there, this is perfectly fine, right? But if it's close enough where your character is going to walk to it, this is bad, right? So how do you simplify this, right? Well, what I would normally do for anything is go to the collision, and then I would remove collision. So if you remove the collision, now there's no collision for this cliff at all. And if I was to play the game just 1 second to show you, right? And if I was to get closer, I would literally be able to walk right through the cliff. Woohoo! Right? I'm in the cliff now, right? So I don't want that. I want collisions, but I want it to be a little bit better than this, right? So how do I do that? How do I do that? Well, if I go back to this cliff on the right, and this is for collision detection, you can see that there are collision options. And one of them is the collision complexity is project default. So by default, your project has a collision complexity. You can accept it, which is what we saw, or you can modify it. And there's some options. Here's one. Use complex collision as simple. If I did that, now you're going to see that the collision detection is much more accurate, all right? However, it's computationally expensive to do so, right? You could do this, but be sparing, my friends. Otherwise, your collision detection is going to be, it's going to really bog down your game, right? But sometimes you need to do this kind of stuff, especially for a cliff like this, if your character is going to come close, right? Then the other thing is your complex collision mesh. You can decide to use the same one. So it's VFMJ, that one, whatever it's called, all right? This is the same process for bringing things in from Blender, okay? So what Blender does is it tries to use convex collisions, right? But what you can do here is you can use complex collision as simple, and then you can use a separate mesh to really make it easy, like, a really nice collision. So if I save this now, and if I go back to the game, and if I go back to that cliff, you're going to see I'm able to get much closer to it, right? Right? Now, you can see there's a bit of skewing, right? Because the cliff is, I've stretched it, like I've scaled it quite a bit, right? But you can see that the character is pretty good at going through most areas around the cliff face, okay? And that's one thing I wanted to show you. Okay, so your challenge, if you choose to accept it, is sculpt. Get a height map that you like, right? Maybe one that you're going to use for your assignment 1. Please don't waste your time and just for practice. This is to help you build your assignment 1 now, okay? Talk to your partner about it. Decide on which one you want to use. That's the one we're going to sculpt. Add features to it. Sculpt some stuff. You can add other things to it. Remember, we want to start big first, the big to the small. Big stuff like a landscape, and then we move slowly, smaller until we get details, okay? So from a big landscape perspective, do this first. Try to avoid or being, try to be not, don't put any texture on right now for your landscape. Don't do that. We're going to do that next week. And we're going to also add foliage and all that stuff next week as well. It's a whole other thing we're going to do. For now, just choose something that you want to. Then take that temple that I gave you, put it somewhere. Put it on some kind of like plateau somewhere, and try that out and see what it looks. Think about the things that I'm asking for in your assignment: sight lines, pathing, all that stuff. Think about the story that you're telling with your landscape. As an example, what is this place, this magical land you're creating? Like, why are we there, right? As an example, and start thinking about some of these other features that you're going to put in. Okay, that's for next week. When I get back together with you, we can talk about those things. We'll also talk about water effects. You can add water. There's a lot of really cool things that you can do before we get together. Well, before we finish this section off for your assignment, for assignment 1. Any questions before we go for the day? Okay, guys, good luck. I want to see your stuff next week, right? So please work on your landscapes. You can work together with your partner, but I want to see what this looked like later on. All right, thank you so much. And that's it for me for today.